What up, though? Welcome to the FatBoy MMA Podcast, where we talk about everything combat sports, but mainly MMA. If you want to hear a couple regular MMA fans talk about MMA history, notable fighters, up-and-coming fighters, and everything in between, then this is the podcast for you. Now, I should warn you, we're not professionals, but we are big fans of combat sports. Now, if that sits good with you, grab a beverage, sit back, relax, and let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the FatBoy MMA Podcast. I am your host, DC. And of course, I got my co host here with me, Locke.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Okay, so we are back to our Fallen Goat series. And for this one, um, listen, this person, I'm going to tell you up front, I'm biased. If you have anything bad to say about this person, we need to meet at whatever local MMA gym, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, wherever you're at. We need to meet and we need to go to fisticuffs because I'm not allowing anything bad to be said about this person because
Send
I'm
us
biased.
location.
Right. Drop your location. I'm not saying I'm going to win. I'm just saying we have to fight. Right. So before I tell you who today's episode is about, I actually want to run down some accolades. And the reason why I want to do this, I want you to get a picture of some of what this person accomplished before I give you a name. Okay, so one, this person was a Olympic medalist, um, and this person was also the first Olympic medalist to win a UFC championship. This person was also a Strikeforce champion. So one in two major organizations, which we know not many fighters are able to win in two major organizations the championship. Um, in the UFC championship, had 6 title defenses. Never went the distance for the length of the career. Went on a 12 fight win streak and has the most title defenses in UFC bantamweight history. Okay. Now, if you a lot of thoughts ran through your head as to who this could be, you may have thought about triple C's. You may have not known exactly about bantamweight and said maybe who I don't know. But who we're talking about today is none other than Rowdy Ronda Rousey. And I don't have my sounds set up, but just know that everybody's cheering right now in the background.
I'm cheering over here, if nothing else.
So, Locke, of course, I hit you with this one. You already know from our years of being friends back when Ronda was in her prime and everything that I am definitely a Ronda fanboy. So before I kick it off with any more kind of accolades or anything like that, I want to throw it over to you and anything that you wanted to say about Ronda, and then other than that, of course, we'll go with our normal stuff. I'll give out a few more accolades, and then we'll just generally talk about her career as a fallen goat and why she's in the fallen goat series versus the goat series.
I'm going to try my best to stay a little bit even keel, but I am also a big fan.
Hmm.
So I want to try not to make this the super biased podcast
Too late.
where we just sit here and it's like that Saturday Night Live skit where like, remember that one time when Ron, we could just do that all night. But that's what it's going to turn into. But yeah, I'm a biased opinion, but I also think it's one of the terrible sides of MMA when you see how quick people turned on Ronda and now it's
Yes.
kind of in vogue to shit on her. And I think, like any of the pioneers of the sport, which she for sure is, an MMA pioneer, for the female side. And, people shit on them and we kind of forget about their contributions. That's the ugly side of MMA is how fast the fandom can turn on you.
Yeah, no, I totally will agree. And she's the reason why we have Amanda Nunez, why we have Valentina Shevchenko and so many of these other women, and why they're able to make a real serious career in MMA. Now, don't get me wrong, there were women MMA fighters before Ronda, but it really didn't get a lot of attention. It wasn't respected, and they didn't make a lot of money, right?
Hmm.
Um, Whereas if we look at MMA today and women's MMA, it's starting to rival men, right? It's not like when you look at the NBA versus the WNBA, right? It doesn't matter whether you think the women are just as good as the men or whatever else. When it comes down to people wanting to watch, and this is not a man thing, this is men and women. This is buying tickets, this is showing up, this is supporting, this is watching. There's a tremendous difference between the NBA and the WNBA. It just hasn't gained the respect of the art that, the NBA has. I would
Because
say the complete.
honestly, even most female basketball fans, so females
Hmm.
that really love basketball, and female basketball players
Hmm.
tend to prefer you know the
The
pros
NBA.
because it's the
Yes.
NBA because it's the top league. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's a very select group that's based mostly on friends and family and just
Yes.
supporters in general.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. And that's the great thing as to what women's MMA was before Ronda Rousey really broken into mainstream. And don't get me wrong, there were other people along the way that helped it, but Ronda Rousey really pushed it through the stratosphere, right? So, and that was just to talk to about what you mentioned as to her being a pioneer. For people that don't know or maybe new to the sport, as we always talk about, I know some things we say just by nature of having watched the sport for so long, it may go toward talking to an audience that may already know. But our goal is also to be able to talk to people that may be new to the sport and they may not know Ronda Rousey's history or why she was even highly regarded. They may have just seen her last, three fights and said she was completely overrated. And why do anybody talk about her without knowing the side of the pioneer? So, go ahead. You were about to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when you look, I believe Muhammad Ali lost his like last two fights in a row, right? I mean, it's the
Hmm.
nature of fighting. It's not much different than running backs.
Yeah,
Barry retired at the top of his game. Most running backs don't do that. Like Emmett Smith's
correct.
last season, he probably rushed for like 600 yards, three
Yeah,
averaging three a carry. It's just you remember the hits,
right.
and that's the nature of the fight game. Is most of the time it ends on the bad side.
Yeah, and we've talked about that with some of our other fallen ghosts that we've, went over. One of them in particular, of course, BJ Penn. People that are new to the sport that may look at BJ Penn's record really won't understand who BJ Penn was if they don't listen to an episode like Fallen Goat to really understand that history.
Or
So,
even a Anderson Silva too.
absolutely. And we
And
haven't
just
done
real
that
quick,
one
because I
yet,
got it
but that
up,
one will be coming. Yes.
uh, Muhammad Ali, not only did he lose his last two, he lost three of his last four.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
So I'm
that's
going
the
to run
GOAT.
down exactly. So I gave a few accolades kind of before I mentioned who we were going to talk about, but I'm going to run down a few more of the accolades that Ronda Rousey had. So in her career, she went 12-2. Um, she had title defenses. She won the Strike Force title first. And she defended that once, but then kind of Strike Force slowly went defunct. But then also, she was the reason why Dana White decided to allow women into the UFC when he previously talked about women would never fight in the UFC. And it was Ronda Rousey that made that turn that got women into the UFC. So when the women's division came, it was only one division, 135. Um, so once she got to the UFC, she won the title there. Of course, she was in the first title fight. She won the title there and then defended it six times. And by the way, that six times title defense it's actually tied. And not by who you think it would be tied by. Not Amanda Nunez. Amanda Nunez is very special, and she did something special by becoming a champ. But similar to some of Anderson Silva's wins when he went up to 205, unfortunately, those wins don't count in your streak when we're talking about title defenses and everything like that. So, although if you count total titles and defenses in the UFC, Amanda Nunez is about at 8 before she just lost, but like 3 of those were at 145 instead of 135.
Hmm.
Um, so in her career, she never went the distance. It was one of the reasons why she was such a big money maker, why she was so good for the sport. She was taking you out, and she actually only went out of the first round twice. Once against Holly Holm, which was a loss, and once against Misha Tate in their second fight. So I mean that's huge. 14 fights in the UFC, never went the distance. The only people that would even borderline be at that type of stature would be in the men's heavyweight division. Nobody else has that type of either you're going to finish me or I'm going to finish you type of record. You
It's a
know
100% finish rate.
exactly. Um,
Derek Lewis ain't even got that.
Exactly. So she had a 12 fight winning streak in the big promotions, which is what I really count. She had 10, which is over her Strikeforce UFC career, 10 fight winning streak. Just to give you an example or comparison, the two women that I regard in that conversation as far as GOATs, you have Amanda Nunes, she went on a 12 fight win streak, and Valentina Shevchenko on an 8 fight win streak.
Yeah.
Were you about to say something?
Um, and the King of the Cage, I mean, that's not a big promotion, but it's one of the
Mhm.
bigger of the regional promotions.
Yes, yeah, it is. And I think she had one fight there and one fight in another promotion that I don't
Is
remember the name. It wasn't
HKFC.
one. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one at all. But I totally agree with you. King of the Cage actually has brought some great talent all through the larger promotions of MMA that went
Hmm.
through there. Um, During her consecutive streak, she beat some names you may have heard of: Julia Budd, Misha Tate twice, Sarah Kaufman, Liz Carmouche, Sarah McMahon, Alexis Davis, and Kat Zingano. As far as awards, she was actually inducted into the International Sports Hall of Fame class in 2018. She's had two Fight of the Night bonuses. She's had Submission of the Night, Performance of the Night on about 3 or 4 occasions. First female UFC champion. As I mentioned before, Olympic medalist. She won the bronze medal in judo in the Olympics before she got into MMA. Um, Fastest women's victory as far as finishing. She finished Kat Zingano in 14 seconds. Um, Longest title fight finishing streak in U.S. history. This is actually with men and women. That's 6. Nobody else has finished 6 opponents in a row in a title. Once again, title fight. So you're only fighting number one contenders, right? As I mentioned earlier, tied for the most title defenses in women's UFC history. She's tied with Valentina Shevchenko, who also has 6, just crossed the 6 mark. And she also, very much known if you don't know Ronda for her arm bars. And she has the most armbar finishes in UFC, WEC, Pride, and Strike Force history. This is men and women across the board. She had a nickname, the Arm Collector. She was a two-time female ESPY award winner in 2014 and 15. And she was also a three-time Fighter of the Year 2012, 13, 14. I won't go into the different medals and awards that she won in judo other than mentioning her Olympic medal, but she was also very decorated there. And then, as I mentioned, a 6 time bantamweight champion, which is actually the record at bantamweight for both men and women. So that kind of ran down her accolades. I'm gonna
Well,
let you die. Go ahead. I was gonna pass it to you anyway.
oh, sorry.
Go
Well,
ahead.
I was thinking, I know you didn't want to get into it, but I do want it to be said that she's got 3 golds at the Pan Ams, which is
Hmm.
a big deal also. And, you know, that bronze in the Olympics, women's judo is a very deep sport in the Olympics. You know,
Hmm.
at the world level, they got a
Yes.
lot of high competition. So Sarah McMahon has a silver medal in the Olympics in wrestling,
Hmm.
and that's
Hmm.
awesome. I don't want to try and take away from what she did, but that's doesn't have the talent base that the Olympic judo does. So that bronze medal in the Olympic judo is very impressive.
Yeah, and I think it's because you have a lot of people that take judo very, very seriously. And you have places like America, Russia, some places that take wrestling serious, but not as much on the women's side, right?
Hmm.
Judo is just serious, period. And you have a lot of people that take it very seriously and a lot of competition there. So to win that medal, um, in the Olympics, especially as an American, when once again I'll compare it to like BJ, BJ Penn winning, winning, and I forget which one it was, but winning as an American in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, winning the gold, it was huge. Like Americans don't do that, right? Not at that time. So Ronda, as an American, winning, medaling in the Olympics, although it was bronze, it's a huge thing, and it definitely deserves its accolades. And like I said, she was very decorated in judo before ever stepping foot in the MMA. So before I dive into, any of the questions or anything like that I had, I wanted to throw it back over to you. I know you pointed out one thing, but just in case there was anything else you wanted to put out there that I missed or anything else you wanted to say about Ronda or GOAT status or anything like that before I dive into some of the questions.
No, I think I'll end up spitting it all out as you ask the questions, anyways. So I'll save it. This was one being a fan, and the fact that most of her fights were 34 seconds. Like I rewatched most of Ronda's fights
Yes,
before we watched this,
in like 30 minutes.
and one thing I will say though, having rewatched so many of her fights going into this, I will say the signs were all there, and we just weren't seeing it because we were so fired up on her ripping everybody's arms off. But now, with the knowledge of hindsight, watching some of these fights, it was there the whole time.
I'll tell you when I really saw it, and it was in. I'm going to end up asking you a question about your least favorite Ronda Rousey fight. It's not the next question, but I'm
Okay.
going to end up asking you about that. But this, what I'm going to say as my fight was the fight where I was most disappointed in Ronda and where I saw the most holes in her game. And it wasn't too long after that where she was derailed, right? So, but we'll save that one, and you probably know the fight I'm talking about. So, the first thing I want to know is, actually, when did you become a Ronda Rousey fan?
So I've been a fan of hers since she moved to Strikeforce. So I didn't see the first 2 fights either, but I was an early adapter to women's MMA. So I'd always been watching it because I had anything to get free fights. And I worked at a cable company, so I had all the channels. So Showtime, I always had all the Strike Force and Elite XC and stuff like that. So I've seen every single Ronda Rousey fight since her third fight. So I didn't see the first 2, but I've seen every single one. And I think that her era of dominance is fucking. I forgot what the question was.
No worries. I've been drinking too. I was just asking when you became a fan,
Oh,
basically.
that's right. Um, So yeah, so I've seen every single one of her fights. So I would say I've been a fan of hers as long as she's been fighting.
Nice, nice. It sounds like we became fans close to around the same time. I really can't tell you which fight because I have seen all the Ronda fights, but I remember she jumped on my radar. Actually, I used to watch, I was a really big fan of Inside MMA back when it was on HD Net with Boss Rutan and Kenny Rice. And what I loved about that and HD Net, they were back then what UFC Fight Pass is now. Like if you have Fight Pass, which I have, um, you get all of these regional shows and all these small shows, and you get kickboxing and Muay Thai and all of this stuff that they have brought under the banner of UFC Fight Pass. Well before that, if you wanted to see a lot of these, HD Net was a company that Mark Cuban and a bunch of other billionaires got together to put together back before TV was all HD,
Mm-hmm.
hence the name HD Net. And their whole goal was they wanted to put on some live TV stuff and sports and everything like that. And this particular MMA show, they would talk to everybody, including the up and coming people. And on this network, they would have a lot of the smaller shows. And so they actually had Ronda Rousey. She was on there more than once, but they had her on there. I want to say the first time I saw her on there was maybe a fight or two before she fought Misha Tate, which, she fought Misha Tate like 4 fights in her career, 5 or something like that, right? So this would have been about her third or fourth fight when she was on there and I saw her. And everything about her I instantly liked. She was definitely the right amount of crazy, the right amount of delusional to pull off a world championship in your fourth fight. Like the confidence, everything was there. And then I saw her fight and I was like, oh, yeah, oh, she's a star. And, before you know it, and even on that show, they were talking about how Dana White said that women would never fight in the UFC. And she said she was going to change his mind.
Well,
Instant
and
star.
not to be the feminist of the show, but a lot of what a lot of people see as the negative on Ronda Rousey, what you're talking about, the delusional, the crazy, the swagger, a lot of people that don't like that about her. And I think that's something that's a microcosm of society.
Mhm.
Where a woman does this thing, she's bossy or she's a bitch or
Mhm.
something like that. When a dude does the same thing and it's like, he's a competitive edge, he's scrappy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We
Mhm.
we like that, and I think it's something where she was able to kind of bust that door down and be like, nah, you can be a cocky, scrappy girl and she's very much a girl, you know what I mean? She's a feminist, like she's a girly girl. She gets dressed up, but she's also got that other side, you know. And I think she kind of kicked that door down to where we'd be like, no, we're athletes. We can act the way that everybody else acts.
Yeah, I think it was a large part of her edge. I think intimidation, whether people want to admit it or not, especially when it comes to the fight game, is a weapon. Um, the most you can do to beat a person before you step into the cage or the ring or whatever, the most you can do to beat them mentally, you have an edge when you go into that cage or ring. And part of that is your confidence. Part of that is the things that you do to make that other person hesitate. And I mean, for me, Ronda Rousey had the great package, and it did end up being a great package because once again, it really put women's MMA on the map. You know. Um. So, what was your favorite Ronda Rousey fight?
So that's a trick question because, like I said earlier, like all my favorite fights, when I watch them, I see all these warning signs that I didn't notice when I was watching them first time through.
Hmm.
I think my favorite Ronda Rousey fight, it's probably more my favorite Ronda Rousey moment because, obviously it'd be like her winning the belt or something like that, but that's not a fight that I'm a big fan of. But the Alexa Davis fight is a fight where she actually looked. No, she still had some errors, no head movement, stuff like that. But she cracked her with a good shot, then followed up with a knee, and then I loved the headlock hip toss, to shots to the head. That's one of my all-time favorite moves, favorite positions,
Yes.
all that. So I would say that's my favorite. It's a 16-second first round win, so it's one of her fastest evers. It's not her fastest, but it's one of the fastest. And she actually mixed it up a little bit and did a few different things. And I have one
Nice.
that I thought was my favorite one, and then I rewatched it, and it's not my favorite.
Let's see if it's the one that I say is my favorite. So my favorite Ronda fight is the Misha Tate second fight.
Okay.
The reason why that one is my favorite, one, this is the first time she ever got out of the first round.
Mm-hmm.
But two, I love one thing about champions. I don't like champions who don't fight long enough or don't refight opponents or anything like that. To me, that's a part of being a champion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so her and Misha fought in Strike Force for the title. And then they gave Misha another title shot in the UFC, right? For Ronda's title at that time. And the thing about it, Ronda had a history by that time. I want to say this was maybe 7 fights in or something like that. She had a definite history. You know exactly what she was going to do. You know how she was going to win. You already got armbarred in the first fight. And everything you've trained, everything of your being says don't get armbarred.
Mm-hmm.
You get out of the first round, and you get out of the second round, and you get to the third round, and you get armbarred with the same exact move from the first fight, right? Knowing that it's coming. To me, that was one of the greatest moments of me seeing Ronda Rousey overcome adversity for somebody that knows exactly what you're going to do, but can't stop it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of those things to me that helps boost you to GOAT levels when everybody has studied you and they know what you're going to do. And you've done it to this person before, but they just can't stop it. So that was my favorite Ronda fight.
No, I could see that. That was definitely one that was up there, but I wanted to go for a dominant win.
What was the one that I mean, listen, it was still a finish. It was dominant.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not like she was in trouble and getting stopped in that fight or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was dominant.
Yeah,
What
for
was the
sure.
one that you said was you were gonna go with but decided not after rewatching it?
The Sarah McMahon fight.
Okay.
So she finished her with the knees to the body,
Hmm.
but rewatching that fight, her boxing was really exposed. Sarah McMahon was not a high level striker, and she was piecing her up pretty good. And Ronda's just kind of got that Brock Lesnar thing where she can win because she's a physical specimen and she can grapple
Hmm.
and she can, impose her will on these people. But she doesn't react well to being punched in the face, and that's not something you can train. Jorge Masvidal just has it. You punch him in the face, he's just about that life. It's.
Vanderlei Silva.
Exactly. Um. So, but if you watch that fight, Sarah McMahon was lighting her up a little bit. Now, Ronda did show something that I think she could have tried to have utilized more in her career, and maybe could have went something. She did some good work up against the cage, like kind of Randy Couture style in the
Hmm.
Sarah McMahon fight, like coming off with like elbows and then the knees. And I think that could have been something she could have utilized in her game a little bit more. But that's around when she decided she wanted to be a boxer because, as we know, all grapplers, when people say they don't have hands, they want to prove how good of boxers they are, you know?
Right.
And I think she looked good doing the cage work, the dirty boxing. Not dirty boxing because she's throwing knees and stuff like that, knees and elbows, but that style of fighting. But when they were in the middle of the cage trading punches, it didn't look good.
Yeah, I think, going back to that time, I think some people were delusional. I don't think I was ever delusional as far as her stand up being good. What I think impressed was her stand up was growing over time, right? Because in her early fights, it was really, really bad. And it was like she got better and better. But in her early fights, she didn't have to use it much. She would just get to the girls, and I mean, it's pretty much over with after she grabs you. So I think, like with a lot of people, when you see them younger and raw, you're not really judging where they're at. You're judging their potential and where you see things going. And the example I like to use for that is John Jones. Early John Jones in the UFC was very raw. He did so many things wrong. But coming up with a lot of the other guys that he was kind of coming up with at that time, I would say as far as polish, he was at the bottom. But when I saw him and the things that he was doing, I said, "Oh no, this guy has something. He has something they don't have." And as he progressed, you saw that lead to some great things. And as we know, um, had John Jones not, did a lot of things outside of the cage that kind of hurt him in the cage, who knows what his numbers would be right now? His numbers would be so large, it would be undeniable that he's the GOAT, right?
Hmm.
So, when I look at a Ronda Rousey or somebody like that, I think I judged her accurately for a lot of things. I just think it was based on potential. And I think she ran into much, much more superior strikers before she was ready. And they happened to be bigger women that she couldn't muscle. And that was a bad storm for her.
No, I agree. And on top of that, she ran into better strikers. I think if she would have took her time more to work on those skill sets. So if you look at 2015, she fought 3 fights that year. Now I know she was doing first round finishes, but all of her career besides that, because she didn't fight for that long. She only fought for like 6 years. Um,
Yeah.
but 2012, 2 fights, 13, 2 fights, 14, 2 fights. Then all of a sudden, 2015, she fights 3 fights. And that's also at the same time, she was one of the busiest people on earth. She was doing TV
Yep.
spots, she was
Hmm.
doing guest
Movies.
movies, commercials. She was a legitimate star. And, good for her. She made hay while the sun was shining. You know what I mean? But it's just asking a little much. I think if she could have slowed it down a little bit, did the 2 fights, but she kind of, you can only redline it for so long, and I think she could have took it slower with the career, especially without these
Hmm.
outside things, and develop that striking more instead of just diving head first. And but then when you're winning dominantly, obviously you always think that's gonna keep going.
Yeah, no, I agree. Plus, I think early on, one of the reasons why she didn't fight quite as much was one, it wasn't as many female fighters. One. Two, Mike Dolce talked about she had a lot of issues where she wasn't healing properly from fights before he came into her training camp. And, come to find out it had to do with the nutritionist that she had and the diet they had her on, and she just wasn't getting enough as to what her body really needed to heal herself. And so I think that had something to do with it. You know how it is. You're riding a high. You're beating everybody. You feel like you're untouchable. All of a sudden, you're knocking people out. Everybody loves you. You're the hottest thing walking, and your body feels good again. I want 5 fights this year.
Well, and
you
she
know,
was it's hindsight, but she was a huge favorite over Holly Holm.
Absolutely. She was a favorite over everybody. I don't think
Mm.
there was one fight. Even, when you go into the Amanda Nunez fight, I know maybe newer people may not understand. She was a favorite over Amanda Nunez. It what Amanda Nunez at that time wasn't the Amanda Nunez that you know today. That Amanda Nunez had just lost a fight like maybe what, 3, 4 fights ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it wasn't, and she lost a fight to somebody that Ronda Rousey beat in like 14 seconds, right? So But as I always say, I'm one of those people that truly believe styles make fights, right?
Mhm.
So you can't say just because this person beat this person, the other person will beat that. It doesn't work out that way. Um,
Well, and I
but
think when you
now,
say
go
when you
ahead.
say styles make fights, I think that's why the Holly Holm fight was actually a recipe for disaster because she didn't have the tools to stand with her. And while Ronda was a great chain grappler once you were in the ground, so in scrambles and in positions, from a takedown standpoint, she wasn't a wrestler. So she didn't really chain grapple like that. In the MMA, a lot of times that's what it takes to get these people down because they just drill takedown defense so much. So hers was really based off those either a trip or a judo toss. And Holly Holm, in addition to being a nightmare with the stand up, the way she's built, she's kind of tall. She's
Mhm.
got big, strong hips, and
Yep.
she uses them when she fights. She's got really good hips. And once Ronda wasn't able to get those tosses, she was doomed because she can't switch to a single leg and then put that to a high crotch and then you know what I mean. That's not her style of
Hmm.
grappling, and that's where I
Right.
think maybe in that situation if she could have pushed her up against the cage, so now strike with her, but instead of being in the middle in your kickboxing, you got her leaned up against the cage where you can still kind of use your grappling and land those elbows and knees and foot stomps and take maybe some of that steam out of her.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think Holly Holm, especially earlier in her career, she had a lot of that Chuck Liddell in her. Her wrestling, she just wanted to keep it standing and kick your head off. That's really what it was. So she had a lot of that in there, and that didn't work out well for Ronda. But that rolls into what is your least favorite Ronda Rousey fight? And I'll touch on the one that I spoke of earlier, but I'm going to let you go first.
Well, my least favorite would be the Holly Holm fight, I would say. I mean that No, you know what actually? I'm not, because at least in the Holly Holm fight, she was out there trying to do a couple things. The Amanda Nunez fight, she just got the piss beat out of her.
Yeah, that one was sad.
And it was really hard to watch. Like, I just pretend like that fight didn't happen. Like, I count the loss on a record, but like physically I block out the events of that night. Because
I have
that's
no
not just the
memories, no recollection of that.
that's not just the worst I've ever seen Ronda Rousey in a fight. That's like one of the worst main event performances I've ever seen. Like, she really, I think she made the right. Well, we'll get into that later, but I think she didn't bring it in that fight.
Yeah, she definitely in her mind said, I'm done with this shit.
Yeah,
So my least favorite Ronda Rousey fight is the Beche Correa fight. And
that's
this
your
is the
least
reason
favorite.
why. Least favorite,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. This is the reason why. Goes back to what we were
Remember when
talking about
Betch
earlier.
Kohei, she used to weigh in with thongs?
Listen, we're not talking about the good old days of UFC back when you could do that instead of this new fight kit stuff.
Yeah.
We're not talking about that,
I'm just
okay?
saying that was dope.
Those were the good old days. So, this is the reason why that was my least favorite fight. Um, that was a fight where she got a KO with strikes, and everybody that wasn't a Ronda Rousey fan became a Ronda Rousey fan. And Betche was undefeated at the time. Ronda Rousey was undefeated at the time. And she is Brazilian, and she had that old school Brazilian demeanor. Something I actually want to do a podcast on. I think it's a lost art. But if you remember like old school Vanderlei Silva, um, you know, old school Shogun, not Shogun, but maybe probably closer to Ninja, but some of these old school
Cyborg
Brazilian
Santos.
fighters, yeah, yeah. some of these old school Brazilian fighters that really like that stare down
Hmm.
before the fight, the stare down the cage, everything. It was a really
Pele,
intimidating president. Yeah,
Pele
yes,
Landajan.
yes. It was a really intimidating presence that they would have. Um, and leading up to that fight, her confidence was on 9,000. She got in Ronda's face. She was nasty, everything like that. And Ronda got emotional, took the bait, went out there and started striking with her. Got hit with way too many punches that she didn't block, slip, anything like that. She ended up landing her punches and stopping. And everybody became a Ronda Rousey fan. People that didn't even watch the sport or didn't like her. And I saw it and I said, no, I don't like that. And I remember in the group, in our fight group, I said at that time, I don't like that at all. I'm glad for the win. But if she did anything like that against Holly Holm, because Holly Holm was already buzzing as the possible next opponent, she'll get KO'd. That's not how you go out and fight. You're not the type of fighter that can take one and trade. That's not what you do. And that's what she did in that fight. And I saw it as something that was going to be a detriment. What I didn't know was everything was going to happen that very next fight. But that was the fight, as you talked about. Um, the signs were there and so many things like that. A lot of things I chalked up to learning. When you get to this point and you're at, 12 fights in, 11 fights in, and you let somebody get you so emotional where you go out and do that, the writing is on the wall most of the time. There's only probably one fighter I've seen do that and it didn't derail their career, and that was DC when he fought um what was the guy name? It was a wrestler that the UFC brought in
Pat Cummins.
specifically. Yeah, Cummings. And he went out there and fought him emotional in a terrible fight. And he got hit way too many times. He stopped him just like Ronda Rousey stopped her. But I said, you can't fight like that. But other than fighting John Jones, he never fought emotional again. And as we see what happened with the John Jones fight, when you go out there and fight emotional and you throw caution to the wind, it's never good. And now I also know people can really get under your skin right before the fight. And if you remember, that was what happened in the Holly Holm fight. And Ronda got really upset right before the fight because during one of the standoffs, Holly Holm really got up in her face. And up until that point, she was talking about how Holly Holm was a good person, yada, yada, yada. And Holly went into game mode like you would as a fighter that had, and by that time, Holly Holm probably had 30 fights. Not all, UFC fights or MMA, but she was a kickboxer and a boxer before MMA. She probably had 30 fights under her belt. She can be cordial around you and turn it on when the fight happens. And Ronda got emotional right before that and went after Holly like a bull, and it didn't turn out right.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about the Betch Correia fight, and it definitely was there. And I see why you would say that because what I was talking about was the wanting to stand up and strike that I thought was her doom. But what you're saying is, I mean, that is part of it, but that's rooted in the fighting too emotional. And I think that the last fight where she had all of that was that second Misha Tate fight. She still fought her fight.
Mm-hmm.
She fought smart enough. She didn't get over emotional. She had the right amount of emotion, enough that fuels her where she's flipping her off, but she didn't fight over emotional. And then after that, Sarah McMahon would fight. That's the one I was talking about. That's where it started to show that she wasn't fighting her fight anymore, and she was still getting by because she was better than these girls, but she was trying to box and it wasn't going well. And she was, coming up with ways to win. So yeah, the Betch Correia fight, it definitely shined, but she started doing it with Sarah McMahon. And even though her stand up was bad in the Betch Correia fight, the punch that she finished her with was really good. It was like a little pinpoint, like
Yeah, it was.
the best
I
strike she's
agree.
probably ever thrown in her fighting career was the knockout punch on Bechkahea. And it was just like a little quick, accurate jab shot.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And, maybe it was one of those things, like you said, especially her having a highlight like that. If you remember after that, she really went on a tour. That was when she went on Rogan and everything else. Maybe that was a time to, do like you hear some of the champions do now and say, I need to take a few months off, not fight for the rest of the year, rest a little bit. If you really think you're a striker, strike a little bit more, bring some more women boxers into the camp, everything like that. But to your point earlier, slow it down a little bit. So that leads me into another question, and I'm actually going to make it a compound question. They don't necessarily have to do with each other, but hey, what does that have to do with
I'm
anything of how how we do this? So two things. A
going to
lot of
forget
people
one of them.
you won't. The way I layer on you, you'll be fine. So two things. One, as we know, a lot of people said she probably should have changed camps. That I always butcher his name, Taverdian, um,
Edmund
Edmund.
Tarverdian?
I
That's
don't
what
know
I'm
how to pronounce it. I apologize, Edmund, but we'll just call you Edmund. So a lot of people said she should have probably left that camp and everything like that and moved on. So it's two things. And I want to specifically talk about after the Holly Holm loss. And this is funny because we just had a podcast talking about people who leaves camps after a loss. But
hmm
um, after the Holly Holm loss, do you think one, she should have left camps? And then two, do you think she should have not fought again? And then maybe after the 125-pound division came up, dropped down to 125 and took another run at it. So now you erase the Amanda Nunez fight. So the two-part question, changing camps and waiting after that loss and maybe dropping to 125.
So I don't know if it had to be a matter of changing camps. I feel like she could have did something similar to what a George St. Pierre did, where he made his own camp. So she still could have based her camp around Edmund. The problem is he was the striking coach, and that's where the problem was. But that doesn't mean he's doing a bad job though. You might be able to bring in like a Winklejohn or somebody that could switch that up a little thing here, a little thing there, that makes the whole thing blend better together. So I don't know. I know that's the go-to thing to say is that she was too loyal to Edmund and she should have switched to a different camp, and maybe that's true. But I think that's an easy out. I think no matter what, I think she should have done more to build a camp specifically around her, like bring in some of the top coaches from wherever, and not just have this one guy. Bring in the top training sparring partners, like what GSP did. He would put together like all-star
Mm-hmm.
coaching staffs. And
Oh,
I think that would have been a way to go as opposed to just switching a camp altogether.
and
Because
what
you have the
about
money to
holding
do
off
it.
for 125 after the Holly loss?
I'm never a fan of dropping down or moving. Like after a loss, I would prefer to move at camp than drop weight class. When you start doing that after losses, a lot of times it doesn't work out. I just feel like, unless it's going up sometimes, but you have to know that there could be some lumps involved in that. You could hit a couple speed bump because these guys get big and strong, and you got to commit to it. So I'm not a fan of that. And at the Amanda Nunez fight, she looked like a fighter that didn't have it no more. And I don't mean that she's still not a talented fighter. I think it looked like she didn't want to be doing it. And that's how you put in a performance like that. And you don't know that you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do it until the last minute because you always get nerves or butterflies or whatever. You know what I mean? But then you
Mm-hmm.
get out there and you really realize, I don't think this is what I want to be doing no more. In the meantime, this monster is beating the shit out of you. And that's a tough situation. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she should have waited and went to 125. She made a shitload of money and she built enough like cult of personality that she's now still able to generate revenue raise her family, do her own little thing, just off her hardcore fan base.
Yeah, and she married a giant, so now like they're gonna breed athletic kids,
Yeah, they're gonna
right?
build monsters. Like
Yeah,
they're
so
they're they're, they're just building straight monsters over there.
exactly, and then all the kids will be millionaires because they're gonna be, you know, some type of millionaire athlete. So I'm sure they'll be okay. But
Look, we all know Ronda's story, right? And then you look at Travis Brown, who is a guy that was, I believe he was a D1 college basketball player, and then he
hmm
turned into an elite level MMA fighter.
hmm
Like these would be driven fucking kids. You know
yeah,
what I
and
mean?
and they have a farm, so as we always talked about, especially when you look at us being in Michigan, Midwest, farmers kids, those are some hard working mofos. A lot of the reason why Big Ten wrestling and stuff like that is always so good. You got a lot of these hard working, you know blue collar kids that they don't know anything but hard work, and as we know, the wrestling room is nothing but a constant grind every single day of toughness.
Oh, we know.
I'm not a wrestler, so I can only live vicariously.
Well, if you still kind of make that same money, but now you're making it on Twitch, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that's
yeah,
an easier way to make a living.
I agree. So let me answer those. So one, should she have changed camps? That's a hard question to answer. I lean toward agreeing with you. She tried to build her own camp. The problem is her own camp that she tried to build was never stationary. She was a little bit more like what Tyron Woodley tried to do, where she would move around to all these different places. So she would go and train at a bunch of different gyms for certain things. Like, she'd pop up and she'd be training with the Diaz brothers, and doing a lot of jujitsu and everything like that down there. She would move around. As you mentioned, Edmund was her striking coach. And at least from what I heard, he was doing the right things as far as bringing in female boxers and everything like that. I just think something was wrong with her style. And it's okay if that's where you're at, but not if you're going up against championship level boxers. And it goes back to something you had said before. The biggest issue was her head movement. If you can just fix her head movement and defense, even that Holly Holmes fight is a whole different fight. I'm not saying whether she would win or lose, but that head kick doesn't happen if you're not already rocked from punches, right? Go ahead. You're about to say something?
Well, I think there's two ways to fix it. The head movement's a big one because she was fighting as a pressure fighter. So she's
hmm
moving forward, she's walking you down, and she's throwing punches. You need to move your head while you do that. If it's
hmm
just in a straight line, anybody can hit that.
Right.
Or the other option would be to back her up and take more of a, kickboxing, either outside the pocket, looking to counter, something like that, look for an opportunity to shoot in type, where the head movement's not as important because you're not moving in on them. So they could have did either. They didn't do one or the other. They just kept working as a pressure fighter, but without the head movement. Like Mike Tyson was a pressure fighter. If you look at Mike Tyson in his prime, like nobody had head movement like that. You have to get your
Best.
head
The
off that
best.
center level or
Yeah.
at the center line.
Not just head movement. Mike Tyson had one of the best combinations of head movement mixed with footwork. And it's probably still very underrated today because everybody focused so hard on his power.
Hmm.
But he was a specimen when it came to that. So, yeah, no, I would agree with you. Even mixing in some stuff that made her a little bit more of a kickboxer than a boxer, I think would have helped because as a kickboxer, you'll throw certain kicks, and that person that doesn't want that will take you down. Great, you're in my world now. I wanted to be on the ground anyway, right?
Hmm.
It's one of the reasons why I think people like Oliveira doesn't mind throwing a lot of kicks. What are you gonna do? Take me down? Great,
That's where I
right?
was trying to go.
Exactly. So so I don't think she necessarily needed to change camps. I just think a lot of changes needed to happen in her camp. Where I would disagree with you at is on the 125. I think if you don't rush back and you don't take the Amanda Nunez fight, I don't think that you are I think you give it more time and you have time for the love again. You have time to get over the butterflies of being KO'd. There's a certain thing that I think happens to fighters when they get KO'd, a certain panic or things that automatically gets triggered in them. And if you go back too soon, like any other trauma, you're more likely to experience that quicker because you know what that felt like and you don't want that. And I think at 125, especially when it first opened up, you had a lot of much smaller women going down to 125. And I think she had a chance to fight a few women. And yeah, I don't think she would have been able to reign as champion over Valentina Shevchenko, the best number one champion. But I do think outside of Valentina, almost everybody I've seen down at 125, she could have beat. So I think you give her two fights at 125, build up a little bit of confidence. Now you have a fight between her and Valentina. She loses that fight, but it's a different ending to her career. Even if that at that point she decides I want to go in a different direction. I just think that change, we don't see the Ronda that we saw that said, that turned into uh uh um what was that movie? Lethal Weapon. Um uh Shoot, what is it? Danny Glover in Lethal Weapon. I'm too old for this shit. I don't think she stepped into the ring and said I'm too old for this shit. I think she got hit by the Mack trucks on the end of on the end of Amanda Nunez's wrist, and she got hit by a couple of those and said, "Wait a minute, I remember. I'm too old for this shit." And I just don't see anybody at 125 with that kind of power. And as we know, Amanda Nunez can float between 135 and 145, whereas Ronda Rousey, I think, was much closer to a Valentina Shevchenko. She's a smaller girl than Holly and Amanda and all of them. And if you remember, early Ronda Rousey was pudgy. She was a lot more trim when she got with Dolce because of the way that he took the weight off of her. But I think she's an easy 125 without. I think men's MMA, especially when you have to make those big drops, like going from, you know, 185 down to 170 or 205 down to 185, those big drops, yeah, but 10 pounds, especially when you're not big for the division, I don't think it's that much. And I think she could have either A, carved out another career and beat a lot of women, or B, at least went on a nice little streak, two, three fights, and then ended with some more money and a different legacy as to what she has now.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. The opinions of DC when he says that Ronda was pudgy do not reflect the opinions of FatBoy MMA Incorporated in general, for the record. But I know she used to cut 20 pounds to make bantamweight, so that's one of the reasons I didn't know about 125. I mean, I know Dolce is a miracle worker. Um, I did like Lean Ronda too, though. You know, she brought a
Yeah.
different kind of
Dolce
athleticism and
Ronda
shit.
looked very exquisite. Dolce Ronda is what got her married to Travis Brown.
Um, I like Thick Ronda, but
Thick Ronda and Big Booty Waterson, right? Them your
yeah.
favorites. Yeah.
I hope this podcast never takes off.
It's too late. We're all going down. We're all going down. But no, yeah, I understand it. And yeah, when I say pudgy, it was more like same as Valentina. They're never, you're not gonna look at them. They're not gonna be like fat, overweight, anything like that. But compared to the women that are much bigger, how much they have to take off and how lean they are at 135, that wasn't Ronda or Valentina Shevchenko. If you look at Valentina at 125, she's lean. If you go
Hmm.
back and look at her at 135, it's a world of difference between the body type, the fitness, and I think that could have easily been a Ronda Rousey. And once again, most of the women at 125 are about 5'6" and below, whereas when you go to 135, you're talking about 5'9" and below, and that difference in height and them cutting down in the weight, and especially for her style, I think it makes a difference in the fight.
Yeah, I definitely feel like she could have manhandled some women at 125 because initially
Yes.
that was mostly 115 fighters that didn't want to, straw weights that didn't want to cut no more.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that weight class is going to be bigger and bigger. I think it's taken a while for it to pick up a little bit. Unfortunately, Valentina's in one of those moments where she really needs more competition. But hopefully they'll bring more. So I have one more question and then we'll wrap it up. And the question really comes down to, as you know, I usually ask this question for the GOATs. We know they're done. I get it. It's a compound question. Do you think they retired at the right time or should have kept fighting? And if it was one more fight, who would you have them fight for that one last fight?
Easy questions. And I was actually nervous. I thought you weren't going to ask this one. I was like, this is the question I was ready for. But I guess, like we said, he definitely, I think she retired at the right time. She's got a family. She seems to be loving life and making millions of dollars playing video games and kind of dicking around and doing what you want is a lot more fun than. And I'm still, she puts a lot of effort into shit, but that's easier than getting punched in the face for a living. So,
Yes.
raise a family, good for you. And that's, you know, um, that's something we don't have to talk about as much with dude athletes. Like having a family doesn't change their life as much. They just kind of have a
Right.
kid and then go back to it. Um, so I think that's something. But if she was gonna fight one more fight, and I think it could still do it, just because they're fucking both retired, I'd still think they would both take the fight today. Is Ronda versus Gina?
I didn't think about that one, but that would be huge. And I know at the time, if I'm not mistaken, Gina was one weight class up, but she was never big for that weight class. I think she just didn't like cutting weight.
They
As
could have
we
did a
talked
catch
about,
weight or something.
what I think Gina could have easily came down to 35. Like Gina should have never been in the ring with Cyborg,
No,
right? This is because I think she was fighting at 45, but I think she's taller than Ronda, but she's not of that frame that's like a big frame. I think she didn't cut weight. Um, go ahead. You about to say something?
well, I agree. In the Cyborg fight, she even looked all right for moments, but she just got muscled around. But she landed some shots. She looked like the technically better fighter for a second, and then just got the piss beat out of her
Yeah,
by Cyborg. But like you said, she probably didn't belong out there with her.
yeah. Brute force, size, everything like that is a whole different ball game. So, for this, I think every single time this question comes up, it's a person that they fought before, person they have a big rivalry with, and I would have to say Misha Tate. Even though she has two wins over Misha Tate, I think they have one of those kind of rivalries where it's a rivalry. It doesn't matter what the record is. Everybody's going to come. They're both going to bring it. And be it that Misha Tate did well in the second fight, relatively speaking, and you take Ronda after those two losses, but Misha Tate, and we've talked about this before, I don't think she's anywhere near the best women's MMA fighter. But when it comes down to heart, she has some of the biggest heart in I've seen in MMA. And I think even with her losses, there's no fear in her when it comes to Ronda Rousey. I think she'll bring it, and I think she'll look at it as Ronda's lost twice and been KO'd. This is my opportunity, and I think it would make for an absolute great fight. And as far as her retirement, other than the scenario I named, where she never fought Amanda Nunez. She lost to Holly Holm, went down to 25. I can see that. Other than that, staying at 35, yes, she retired at the right time. You know, knowing Ronda and knowing Travis Brown, they probably still do some training. Um, they're staying fit, once again, working on a farm is hard work. So I know you're staying fit and everything, doing that. And then to your point, you know, doing the Twitch, but also she put all of her, close friends on in wrestling and everything like that. Last time I popped up and checked, which I don't watch wrestling as far as WWE type wrestling. But like what was it? Shayna Baszler was like a big dog over there. And so she took Shayna, Jessamine Duke, um, Marina and all of them. And I think it was originally Shayna's idea for them to go over there. But
Yeah, because she was a
Ronda
big
was the
wrestling
big
fan.
name. Yeah, but Ronda's the big name. Ronda can make it happen. And to be able to do that, carve her career out over there, then leave there and then Twitch is like, she can do whatever she wants to make money. They're not going to hurt, and they don't seem like people that spend money frivolously. So I'm pretty sure she'll be fine. But the fight fan in me wanted to see her with a little bit of a different ending to her career.
And I can't believe I completely forgot to mention it through this whole episode, but what she did in WWE was impressive also. We've seen a lot of people go over there and do like a storyline or two or something like that. She went out there and was a legit wrestler. She committed to it. She learned how to wrestle. And she was a WWE superstar, which a lot of those people that convert over are not. They just do a
Good
couple
points.
events, but she was huge. And that was another career that instead of going to 125 and staying, in the UFC for a while, she could have stayed in the WWE for another 5 to 10 years and made millions of dollars. Also,
Yeah.
she was good at that. I feel like she dominated this world and I said, okay, I'm done with it. Then she dominated that world and said, I'm done with it. I'm just going to start a farm with this big ass dude and make big ass babies and play video games and shit.
Yeah, I think when she left, that was at the point where either they were talking about or she found out, she was with child. But yeah, and Travis Brown, I get it. I'm probably like 5'11". He's like 6'7", 8", or whatever, whatever size they make giants, And but I probably would still fight him over Ronda. Like if it was like, hey, Ronda's up for grabs, but you got to fight Travis Brown. I'd be like, we can go a couple rounds, make sure my insurance is good, my life insurance too, and then yeah, I would go a couple rounds to get Ronda over here on my side. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this.
A couple rounds. A
Yeah, I
couple
mean, okay,
rounds.
a couple seconds in a round, however you want to put it, same thing.
A couple dozen seconds. I'll go a couple dozen seconds against Travis Brown.
Okay, anything left? Anything last you want to throw in here?
No, I think this is one where I get that it's a fallen goat, and especially now because um, Amanda Nunez is probably the goat all time
Hmm.
of women's fighting, but Ronda Rousey is definitely a pioneer to that, and she kind of paved the way. And I'm a huge fan, and it sucks that we're now talking about her as a fallen goat, but like I said, play your video games. It's a much easier way to make a living than getting punched in the face. So
I was saying I would agree, and just to kind of wrap it up, I like to run down a few of those accolades again, just so that people understand, remember why this person was ever in the GOAT conversation because when she was in her heyday, there was no Valentina Shevchenko, there was no Amanda Nunes. The only conversation as far as the women's GOAT was between Ronda Rousey and Justina Cyborg Santos, or whatever the last name is now, since she's no longer married to the other cyborg, the male cyborg, which most people probably don't know, right? But you know, I'm not going to go down once again everything she did in judo, but of course, winning that Olympic medal, women's strike force champion, plus defended the title. UFC, first UFC women's champion, defended the title 6 times. Never went the distance in her career. She's either going to finish you or you're going to finish her. She only went out of the first round twice in her career. Most title defenses in UFC bantamweight history, 12 fight win streak, multiple fight of the night, submission of the night, um, performance of the night, longest title finishing win streak, men and women, ESPY awards, female fighter or female athlete of the year 2014-15, three-time fighter of the year. Just so many things that she did throughout her career. And once again, I'm just wrapping it up. So throwing a few out to understand if you're wrapped into that when it's going on at the time, not looking at it in hindsight, you understand how special she was for women's MMA, MMA in general, and how special she was for the UFC as a pioneer and as a fighter and why she was regarded as a GOAT. So that wraps up another FatBoy MMA podcast. Thank you for listening. Come again. That wraps up another FatBoy MMA podcast. If you have a topic for us, please email us at fatboymma55@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media by going to links.fatboymma.com. That's links.fatboymma.com. Thank you for listening.